Recording in progress. Recording in.
We got a special day for you. We got Wes Moore, candidate for governor, coming in very soon. Super excited to have him join us. Wes, how are you?
I'm blessed. It's good to talk to you.
It is great talking to you as well. Super excited to be here.
It's my joy, man. As you know, I'm a big fan of you and your wife. I think y'all are doing remarkable work. Y'all are representing for our city, for our region, for our culture. So I'm thankful for y'all. I really am.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. You know how hard it is to get out here and work and be in the trenches. You know firsthand what that's like. So coming from you means a lot.
No, and I'm serious, man. That's in the bottom. It's true, and it's something that I know we'll get a chance to talk about as well. But building is hard, and building while Black is very, very hard, right? I mean, like all the different entities, all the different facets that we have to, be able to navigate. And so the fact that you all have been able to not just create a very important niche, but also to set a very important standards as to how we think about this work, as to how we think about, the kind of things and the kind of avenues that we can walk down and the kind of heights that we can reach. It's not just impressive, but also it's respected. And so I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, I'm excited to go ahead and get started here. I know you got you for an hour. I want to be very respectful of your time. I know it's family time. It's the end of a long day, I'm sure. We're winding down on the on everything going on and voting, and early voting, as well as it's great. I'm excited to make moves here. Let me just double check to make sure we've got some good sound quality. My team can make sure that everybody's muted. That would be extremely helpful. Okay, so for those of you who do not know, my name is Khalil Luka, President of Development at Charm City Buyers. Just a quick little blurb here. Charm City Buyers was founded in 2012 by myself and my wife, Kiara Gray. We're a vertically integrated, rapidly growing development and education firm headquartered here in Baltimore City. We provide the tools, the resources, and the guidance to build Baltimore and to close the racial wealth gap by building Black wealth. That is, those are two of our main goals. We have been steadfast in that mission for quite some time. We've got folks here on Zoom. We've got folks here on YouTube, whether you're here on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. Thank you for joining us. Excited to have this conversation with candidate for governor Wes Moore, a good friend of mine who I met way back in 2015 while working with a nonprofit focused on providing the resources and the tools for African-American students to navigate independent school education. Wes, at that time, had a great energy, a very magnetic personality then. He's got that same magnetic personality now and a great smile. So super excited to be here. What I want to do is read a little bit from your bio here, Wes, just so that everybody is level set. We know who you are, which it goes without saying, obviously, but to kind of get the show started that way. So Wes Moore, a combat veteran, a best-selling author, small business owner, Rhodes Scholar, and former CEO of one of the nation's largest anti-poverty organizations, has devoted his life's work to a basic principle. No matter your start in life, you deserve an equal opportunity to succeed. A job you can raise a family on, a future that you can look forward to. Wes graduated with an associate's degree from Valley Forge Military College in 1998, and then Phi Beta Kappa from Johns Hopkins University in 2001. As a teenager, he interned for former Baltimore Mayor Kurt Smoke, and then went on to earn a Rhodes Scholarship, which took him to Oxford University. Inspired by his mentors at military school, Wes went on to serve as a captain and paratrooper with the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne, including leading soldiers in combat in Afghanistan. He also served as a White House Fellow advising on issues of national security and international relations. Upon returning home, Wes wrote The Other Wes Moore, a story about a fragile nature of opportunity in America, which became a perennial New York Times bestseller. It's commonly assigned readings in Maryland schools, and then Wes went on to write other best-selling books that reflect on issues of race, equity, and opportunity, including his latest book, 5 Days, which tells the story of Baltimore in the days that followed the death of Freddie Gray in 2015. It was Wes's commitment to taking on the toughest challenges that brought him to the Robin Hood Foundation, where he served for 4 years as CEO. During his tenure, the Robin Hood Foundation distributed over $600 million towards lifting families out of poverty, including here in Maryland. Fantastic and amazing work. While the Robin Hood Foundation is headquartered in New York City, Wes and his family never moved from their home in Baltimore. Earlier in his career, Wes built and launched a Baltimore-based business called Bridge EDU, which reinvents freshman year of college for underserved students to increase the likelihood of long-term success. Bridge EDU was acquired by Brooklyn-based student financial success platform Edquity in 2018. He has also worked in the finance with Deutsche Bank in London, with Citigroup in New York. But of his many titles Wes has held over the years, there have been 2 that he's most proud of: husband and father. Wes and his wife, Dawn, live with their 2 children here in Baltimore City. Let's give it up for Wes Moore. Quick round of applause. Thank you so much for having us, for joining us. Yeah, absolutely, no question about it. So again, I want to be mindful of your time. We've got a few questions here. Let's jump right in. So starting with the economy. As a business person, I'm constantly looking at the macro economy, like interest rates and macro mortgage loan products and different things. But I want to talk about Maryland's economy, specifically building the workforce of the future. So how do we build the workforce of the future?
Yeah, and I love that we started with this, because one thing I believe deeply, and we continue to push on and understand, that when we looked at the frameworks of a campaign when we first got on board, I knew there's gonna be a lot of people that were talking about jobs and all this kind of stuff, and all that is important. But we staked our campaign very closely and very sincerely on an idea that it is about work, wages, and wealth. Work, wages, and wealth. And you need to have all 3. Because I'm gonna be very honest, if we aren't talking about wealth for our communities, I don't know what we're talking about. Because it's such an old paradigm to simply think this is just about jobs and all this kind of thing. Because a job is not what's going to give you that chance to have actually lasting and generational opportunities, right? That we really have to figure out, what does it mean for us to become an ownership culture, an ownership society? One where, if you look at the wealth gap, and I love that that's the focus of everything that you all have built, because one of the core goals and focus of my life has been that we have got to close the racial wealth gap. Where if you look in the state of Maryland, the racial wealth gap right now in the state of Maryland is 8-to-1. And we all know that's not because one group is working 8 times harder, right? There are systems that continue to allow a wealth gap to exist. And when we're talking about wealth, we're just simply talking about the idea that you can own more than you own. It's a simple idea that you should be able to pass something on to your children besides debt, right? And so we've got to get to that point that as a state, we're talking about closing the racial wealth gap and being able to deal with the very hard and real issues that folks are facing right now. The challenge is not only have we watched a wealth gap increase, to your point, we're now watching increasing economic pressures that are sitting on people in a very distinct and a very real way. And so I'm going all around the state, and when people say to me, they're like, listen, everything feels more expensive. My answer is, it's because it is. It is more expensive. Where you can watch gas prices that can rise 75 cents a month. Where we're watching everything from the price of food to the price of just basic moving around that has now been kicked up. You look at airline prices. You look at prices going out to dinner. You look at prices of going out to the movies, taking your family out. So this is a very real thing, and it's specifically hitting when we're watching a time when wages are still staying relatively flat, right? So the take-home cost continues to decrease for families. Now, there are a few things that we have to be able to do, and I think from a state perspective, that there's certain things that the governor can uniquely do. Now, you're absolutely right. The governor does not have a seat on the Fed board, right? I won't be able to control interest rates. I won't be able to control, how we're going to move rates, right? And there's a lot of things that people can say in retrospect and armchair quarterback what the Fed should have done 6 months ago or what the Fed should have done 8 months ago. But here's the thing that I do know. There are certain things that we can do on a state level right now to be able to release the pressure that is sitting on people and sitting on families right now. The first thing is we've got to get people back to work, right? One of the biggest challenges we have is not just a stubborn unemployment, where Maryland right now is, I believe, ranked 37 in the country in terms of unemployment, right? So while we have one of the largest economies in one of the most affluent states inside the country, we're still ranked 37th in unemployment in the country. And so the reason is because we have a skills gap deficit. So right now there are 2 available jobs for every person filing for unemployment in the state of Maryland. So people say, well, how does that make sense? It makes sense because we have jobs available, but we have people who are not qualified to fill those jobs because it's requiring a different type of skill set. We have a very dynamic, we have a tech-based economy. We have a lot of things that are happening within the state of Maryland, which are good and we should be proud of. Yet at the same time, we are not preparing our children and we are not preparing our workers for those jobs. So that's the deficit that we've got to be able to fix. You've got to get people back to work. You've got to be able to focus on job reskilling, job retraining, moving people into industries that we know are going to have a greater chance of long-term success. We also have to start training our students how not just to be employees, but how to be employers. Where this goes back to the idea of saying, no, don't teach me how to work for somebody. Teach me how to build. Teach me how to own. Teach me how to create. Because if we can do that, you're going to create a measure of an entrepreneurial economy that our economy is going to need to grow and scale, particularly when you're looking at all these new industries that we have coming on board. I mean, we should be training our students to be able to participate in jobs in solar technology, wind technology, green technology, all these technologies that we have coming on board. But if we're not training our students to participate, then we are literally going to watch billion-dollar economies come and go without our measures of participation. You're also watching new economies come on board for the state of Maryland on things like everything from sports betting, cannabis, crypto, all these new economies. But if our students are not participating and learning how to participate, again, you will watch the wealth gap increase while we're watching GDP increase. We've got to fix that. And the third thing we've got to be able to do, we have got to fix a broken childcare system. The childcare system that we have within the state of Maryland is functionally broken. We've had over 800 childcare centers that have closed since COVID. Why that matters is you have a significant portion of the population who is now not able to enter back into the economy, specifically working mothers, who now have to choose between childcare, making sure my child is cared for, or going back into the economy. Not to mention the fact that the vast majority of childcare providers are female entrepreneurs, but are never treated as such. So these are all things that we've got to be able to do. And from a state perspective, we can take leadership on. The state can move to ensure that we're actually getting people back to work, raising a minimum wage so we're getting to a $15 minimum wage and peg it towards inflation in a faster degree. Because right now the state said they're going to do it by 2025. That's too late. People need it now. And so those are some of the core platforms that we are building out all of our economic growth models on. This is about work, wages, and wealth. And all three have to be incorporated.
Love that. I love it. And I love this idea of an ownership society. How empowering is it to feel like there's a society of people that you can network and live with and communicate with and learn and grow with that have that ownership mentality.
That's right.
We need folks at every level, yes. But to really close that racial wealth gap and provide those real opportunities, provide those disposable incomes for a better quality of life, that ownership mentality, that ownership society that you mentioned is spot on. And in regards to the skills gap, I see it firsthand, especially in the construction trades,
Right.
where we've got a lot of folks who are seasoned and they've been doing this for a very long time, but they haven't quite passed those skills on to the next. And there are opportunities for folks to come in for workforce development programs and different training programs to get those skilled trades. But I'm glad to hear that your focus is on ensuring that that skills gap is decreased so that we have more folks in various trades, including construction.
And I got to tell you, Khalil, and it's one of the reasons that I'm so excited about the work that you're doing as well, because one of the things that we funded when I was CEO of Robin Hood, one of the largest, as you mentioned, one of the largest poverty fighting organizations in the country. We actually funded something called non-traditional employment for women, or NEW. What it was a platform that every year it got about 250 women involved in the construction trade, right? And so it was important because these were oftentimes occupations where women did not have pipelines into those occupations. And so what NEW did, and what NEW still does, is NEW actually creates pipelines for women to be able to enter into the construction, building trades, all these things that are good jobs, good paying jobs, good jobs that provide real measures of economic growth and stability for families. But oftentimes there was no pipeline for women to be able to enter into that business. That's something that we also have to do from a state perspective, is when we talk about equitable growth, when we talk about equitable opportunities, when we talk about economic mobility, it needs to be something that the pathways are then going to be opened up for everybody and not just some, because the historic pathways oftentimes were discriminatory by nature, right? Who could participate? Who could benefit? Those are things that we have to take a greater level of consciousness and also intentionality if we're going to address that.
Excellent. That bleeds right into our next conversation and question about education. I know education is near and dear to you. It's evident throughout your career. At one point in your career, you served as a CEO for one of the largest organizations fighting poverty, where you helped secure and invest over $100 million in education funding and supports for children and educators. What is your vision, Wes, for the future of education in Maryland?
I get so excited when I think about this, man. I really do, because for me, it just all begins with it, right? I think about, there were legitimately two things that saved me, because I think about my own life. Like my life has literally been, my life and my existence has been littered with the consequences of bad policies, right? Where, I was almost 4 years old when I watched my father die in front of me because he didn't get the health care that he needed. And I was 11 years old when I felt handcuffs on my wrists, because we came up in areas and neighborhoods that were just chronically over-policed. And that was the way that every issue was dealt with. And I was 14 years old when my mother got her first job that gave her benefits. 14 years old when my mother got her first job that allowed her to work one job instead of multiple jobs. And let's be clear, this is a woman who went on to earn a master's degree. So when we're having conversations about inequitable pay between men and women, or inequitable pay between people of color and non, it's not an academic exercise, right? I've seen this. And so when I think about what education, why it matters so much, is I think about my own life, where there were two things that truly saved me. One, yes, was a mother who just wouldn't quit. That's one. But the second thing was an education that taught me that the world was bigger than what was just directly in front of me.
Yes.
And we've got to be able to provide that. And that means thinking holistically about it, right? That means that we have to have free pre-K for every child in need in this state. Every child in need. Because we know, and again, as a leader, I am data-driven and heart-led, right? I wear my heart on my sleeve. I get it. But data matters. And the data is very clear. 80% of brain development happens in a child by the time that child is 5 years old. So why we have children starting school at 5 makes absolutely no sense. We've got to make sure that our children are starting school earlier, and that they're actually getting the tools and the skills to be able to start earlier. We also have to make sure, when we're talking about what does it mean to have for the future of education, that we're also going to make sure we're creating better pipelines for educators, specifically educators of color, inside of our classrooms, and also doing more to retain them. And, listen, we've got 4 of the top HBCUs in America here in the state of Maryland. And if you go just outside of our borders, go ahead and throw on Howard. So you can't tell me that there's a reason that we have an educator of color pipeline problem. You literally have the institutions right in your state. If you've got a pipeline problem, that's on you, right? And that's something we've got to be able to think through and address. That we have to be able to do more when it comes to apprenticeship programs and trade programs and starting earlier. So if a student does want to go on to be a pipe fitter or an iron worker or work in HVAC, that they have a chance to have a pathway for long-term economic success for themselves as well. I think we had a massive pendulum swing in a direction that actually ended up having a lot of unintended consequences. When we started doing things like evaluating high schools on 4-year graduation acceptance rates, that's not a key indicator, right? I want to know, are you preparing students for long-term economic growth? So if a student wants to go on to become an iron worker, or if a student wants to go on to start a great new business or whatever, that's success. Just because they don't choose to go on to a 4-year institution, that's okay. But we have to reframe and we have to rethink about what is our goals for our children and what is the goals for our families. And so that really does mean having an education system that we're going to work in partnership to be able to build out that are preparing our children for not just the life of now and the jobs of now, but for the jobs of the future. And I was very happy and I was very thankful and proud of the fact that our campaign was endorsed by Maryland's teachers. Of all the campaigns that they could have endorsed, they endorsed our campaign because I think they saw our vision. They saw our values. They saw how we move in partnership. And that is the thing that I'm very excited in this next phase of Maryland's history, that we're going to have a chance to work together to create an education system that is preparing our children to truly move on and take on remarkable platforms and pathways that is their God-intended pathways, but we have to make sure we're actually providing those type of supports.
Yes, exactly right. I remember my first teacher of color was in 8th grade, maybe. I mean, it took until 13, 14 years old to see somebody who looked like me. And the transformative lessons that I learned from that teacher, you couldn't have had that any other way.
That's right. And let me ask you this too. Where did you learn to become an entrepreneur?
Where did I learn to become an entrepreneur? My father, my mentor. Yep, right. A teacher of mine, right? Somebody who taught me.
That's right. But you didn't learn that in school. You didn't learn that in your formal education.
Correct. Yep.
And so I think about that. I was in the same boat, right? I ended up building what turned to be a successful small business. But let me tell you something. The amount of hard knocks I had to go through to learn the industry, the amount of things I had to go through and learn the hard way when I should not have had to learn it the hard way, how difficult it was to get initial slugs of capital. And that becomes one of the biggest challenges, particularly for Black businesses and for businesses led by people of color and led by women, is, when, for all of our businesses, we need this initial thing, and people call it, the friends and family round, right? The friends and family round, where you have the initial people who are closest to you, who will then give you some financial support in order for your business to grow. The challenge is that we all don't have the same friends, and we all don't have the same family. So friends and family round means 2 totally different things depending on who you're talking to, right? And so but these are all things that we had to learn the hard way. And so if we had an education system that was actually helping to build that out, support that framework, P-Tech schools and P-Tech platforms where the private sector is actually working with our community college system and which is working with our K-12 system. So students are actually finishing up with a high school degree, an associate's degree, and a job offer. Like, if we can be innovative and think about things along those lines, we're going to have a really powerful opportunity to be able to create these kind of pathways for our students that they deserve. But we've got to be intentional.
I love that. And that innovative approach is what's needed, especially at a leadership level, where innovation is valued and almost like lifted up, right? Especially when it's driven by data and it's driven by metrics, and it absolutely works. I think this next one kind of bleeds right into that. So in the issues tab of your website, and I'm going to share my screen here so that folks can take a look at your website. For those on other platforms, wesmore.com. Wesmore.com. Feel free to go to Wes Moore's website and take a look at the various priorities that Wes Moore has for the state of Maryland. On the issues tab of your website here, we see a very bold statement: unlocking opportunity for Black families. Unlocking opportunities for Black families. First of all, I love the boldness, right? That intention is what's needed, no question about it. In this section, you talk about the racial wealth gap and closing that racial wealth gap. Can you describe the ways in which we unlock the economic opportunities for Black families?
Yes, and thank you, and I appreciate you pointing that out too, because I am the plan is it's a bold plan, but what it's also, it's unapologetic.
Yes.
Like I'm not, we're not. One thing about me, and people realize, is that I'm not a career bureaucrat. I'm not someone who's been running for office for the past 40 years. That's not how I'm built. I've been working both in and with communities for my entire career. Right? I've been working with lawmakers. I've been working with the private sector. I've been working with the nonprofit sector. I've been working with the people for my entire professional life, getting big things done, because we work across sectors to be able to accomplish big things. I haven't gone from one bureaucracy to another bureaucracy. That hasn't been my career. That's not how I'm built. And I think about that's the way we're talking about what we have to get done in this moment, we've got to be bold and we've got to be unapologetic. And let's be clear, we could dance around and do dance around the edges on things, but it's never going to address the core issues that we have to address as a state. Where right now we're not willing to acknowledge that there are real core structural issues in the way. If we're not willing to acknowledge the reality that race is still the #1 predictor of life outcomes in this country, period. Across the board. And again, that's not hyperbole. That's data. Literally. Where we can look at everything from maternal mortality to educational attainment to lifetime earnings. Race is the #1 indicator of life outcomes in this country.
Wow.
And we have to acknowledge that and be able to bring that to that conversation, because it's the way we're going to be able to address it. And so the way we talk about unlocking economic opportunities for Black families, it's understanding the fact that there are reasons for a lot of these things. Like, for example, when we talk about the wealth gap, you can't talk about the wealth gap without also understanding the fact that while Maryland is a remarkable place and a remarkable state, it's also literally the home of redlining. Right? Baltimore is the home of redlining in our country's history. So if we're talking about things like the wealth gap, one of the core things we see with the wealth gap is that if you look at the history of things like unfair appraisal values in historically redlined neighborhoods, unfair appraisal values have been one of the greatest wealth thefts that we have seen in our state's history. We have to be able to address that. So there's policies that we even talk about, things like addressing historically redlined neighborhoods and unfair appraisal values, because there has to be a way to be able to unpackage it. When we talk about things like being able to focus on baby bonds, because baby bonds are something that happens for children that are born into poverty. It's basically a way of giving some form of a bond, some form of financial cushion, because it's actually been proven to show that it's one of the most effective ways of being able to address both the child poverty rate and the racial wealth gap in one fell swoop. We've got to follow data. We've got to follow data that you see there that we talk about what happens, how we're breaking it down. It's in terms of work, wages, and wealth. And all three of those things become very important. The work on the education, some of the education things we talked about. How are you making sure that we're preparing our people for work, preparing our people for jobs of now, for jobs of the future, for wages? How are we getting to that minimum wage faster than the way we lay right now? And wealth, how are we making sure that people are actually able to own assets? And that includes things like supports for first-time home buyers, so they can actually have a measure of an asset that they can hold on to and something that can grow into materialize. How are we ensuring that the private sector is involved? And that includes things like making sure we have diverse boards on private sectors. We have a minimal amount of African Americans that are sitting on Fortune 100 or 500 boards.
Wow.
And so there's a reason why we need diversity and inclusion and representation across the board when it comes to our small businesses, our large businesses, our corporations, who is in the C-suite, who is sitting on the boards of these organizations. How are we talking about inclusion when it comes to new industries that we have coming on board? You know, in November, the state of Maryland is going to vote on cannabis, for example. We have to make sure that when cannabis, does end up becoming, not just decriminalized, but also legalized in November, which will probably have, what are the equity barometers that we have in place there to make sure that we have an equitable growth industry and not like what we saw on the medical side when it came to Maryland. And so, it's a very detailed plan, as you all will see. And please, I would urge everyone, go to wesmore.com, go to the issues page. Please take a look at all of those things because it is very detailed, but there's a reason for it because it's the roadmap. It literally is the roadmap because with your help, when we win in a week, we plan on winning with a mandate and winning with a mandate to actually go in and get this stuff done. And we want to be very clear about some of the details of some of the items that we want to have in place.
Fantastic. I want to unpack some of the things, some of the points that you brought up. So redlining, for those of you who do not know, Kiara and I have talked about it many, many times, and in your history books, you see it. Redlining was the legal practice where lending institutions and insurance companies and others would literally draw lines on a map and say they would not lend in specific areas. They would not provide insurance policies in specific areas. And those areas were predominantly Black, African-American neighborhoods.
Right.
And this created the disproportionate value of properties in those areas, which fast forward now, it's part of this unfair appraised value program. And we are connected in different conversations currently with different programs like the HOW program, the Home Ownership Works program, where the state of Maryland DHCD is committed to and having conversations around providing grant dollars to ensure that the appraised value of a property and the construction costs to create that property and make it a functioning asset is now bridged with gap funding. And there are several other opportunities that I'm sure, Wes, you are more intimately familiar with.
But you're absolutely right. And literally the way you just brilliantly broke that down, that's exactly how that system is constructed and built to how those disparities look like and the things that we have to be able to address to turn around and eradicate and erase them, right? And you see what that looks like when it comes to appraisal values. We see what that looks like when it comes to, part of the reason they call these, red lines or redlining is literally because there are red lines put up in terms of who could live where, which assets could be in which places. How do you look at ownership mechanisms where you can literally go down, like, for example, if you go in Baltimore, right? And you go down York Road.
Yep.
Baltimore. So all you Baltimoreans, y'all know,
yep.
York Road, like a major artery within the city, right? And you walk down York Road, it should not be lost on anybody that if you're standing in the middle, right, and you look to the left and you look to the right, you are literally watching a home that you see on left or right that could distinguish in value of hundreds of thousands of dollars, literally by turning your head, right? Just doing this, you watch values of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so that is redlining. That's the history. That's the ramifications. That is a real life example of what we're talking about. But you see how that's impacted from everything from transportation lines and where transportation lines were laid out. You see what it looks like in terms of where schools were aligned, in terms of how they're positioned in red line neighborhoods. So there's a large and a long and a nefarious history that has contributed to some of the things that we're talking about. But these are all things that we have to be able to unpackage and unpack when it comes to the type of policies we have to put in place.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. When it comes to transit-oriented development, let's talk about that. Transit-oriented development is also a focus on the link between transportation and economic mobility. I believe I read that on your website.
Well, yeah.
The reality is that if people can more easily get to their jobs, they can more easily work towards creating a lifestyle that potentially includes disposable income and different things that we talked about earlier for them as well as for their families. How important is transit-oriented development to your administration? Excuse me.
It's I actually did a test where I said if I lived over in West Baltimore, if I lived over by Mondawmin, and I gave it the benefit of the doubt and said, let's say I live a block from Mondawmin, right? So I'd have to go very far. But I said, let's give it the benefit of the doubt. If I live a block from Mondawmin, and let's say I just got a new job. I'm working in Fells Point, and I'm working a midnight shift at a brand new job that I was excited about. How long would it take me to get to my job if I lived a block away from Mondawmin? And for all the Baltimoreans on this, y'all know like Mondawmin is a major transportation hub in the city of Baltimore. The answer, because I timed it, the answer is it took me over an hour and a half to go from Mondawmin to Fells Point.
Wow.
Right? So I funded some of the best job training programs and job reskilling programs in the country when I was CEO of Robinhood. And we talked about this before. But if I can't get to the job, then what's the point? What you've done is you've sold me a lie, right? And so transportation-oriented focus on economic mobility is going to be huge. It has to be, because if people do not have the mechanisms to get to employment, then what you're doing is you're creating a concentrated measure of poverty, without even understanding the core implications of what that means or what that actually looks like. And so we have a very clear and concentrated focus to being able to deal with it. I'm very proud of the fact that also, my running mate is a woman named Aruna Miller, Delegate Aruna Miller, who is a seasoned and a respected legislator out of Montgomery County. She is also a former member of the Ways and Means and the Appropriations Committee. And so she understands the capital budget like nobody else. But the other thing I'm incredibly grateful for and excited about is she's a transportation engineer by training.
Wow, okay.
So she is someone who's coming in with a core understanding and expertise of how transportation assets, how important they are, not only to economic mobility, but also to things like the environment, right? Because when you look at the fact that you have 40% of all greenhouse gas emissions are actually from cars and vehicles. So mass transit also becomes very important in order to get people from where they are in an environmentally friendly and safe way. And so that includes, in our region, that includes things like we've got to make sure, and we will make sure, that the Red Line is built. We have to have east-west transit in Maryland. And in my opinion, the cancellation of the Red Line by the governor was disqualifiable. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't even just what he did, right? It was the process and the way it was done.
Yep.
Giving $1 billion back to the federal government as if we didn't need that money. And then in addition to that, even if you disagree with some, because there's some people like, well, I didn't think that the line should have stopped here, or I didn't think that the timing, those are details, right? What leadership is, you bring everyone back around the table and you say, all right, everybody, let's be clear. This is going to happen. Now, if we want to sit there and debate where certain things are, we can do that. That's fine. But we are not stranding our neighbors without transportation assets. That's what's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And it should have been built. It will be built in our time. But we also know that it can't stop there. It's not just about the Red Line, right? It needs to be the Red Line plus. So we need east-west transit, but we also have to focus on things like green buses and green and clean ways of being able to move transit, to having bike lanes. So if people want to move and navigate that way, that they have those options for that as well. So it really does mean, how do we think holistically about transit and moving people from where they live to where they worship, where they live to where they go to school, where they live to where they work, and to do it in a safe and efficient and affordable and effective way in order for that to be real. That is a huge priority for our administration and something that we are going to move on and get done.
Thank you. I have to say, I was shocked when I saw that almost $1 billion was given back to the federal government for the Redline. It was shocking to me. For those who don't know, the Redline system would connect West Baltimore County, so Woodlawn, to East Baltimore, Bayview Hospital, a Johns Hopkins institution. It was anticipated that 40,000 people every day would use the Redline. Something that would more efficiently and more easily connect folks to job opportunities throughout the city. And it was canceled. It was shut down, and the money was given back to the federal government. Glad to hear that you're passionate about bringing the Redline here, to having conversations of bringing the Redline back.
And I tell you, too, we have, you don't get, what's that expression? You don't get a second chance to make your first impression, right?
Yeah, there you go.
But we got a shot here because we have billions of dollars that are coming from the federal government right now that are actually earmarked towards this, right? We have billions of dollars that's coming in, literally $7 to $8 billion that's coming in that's earmarked towards transportation and infrastructure, right? And that's going to go towards roads, bridges, all that kind of stuff, but it is going to go towards mass transit projects. That we have $3.7 billion that's coming into the state that's deemed discretionary. $3.7 billion. That we have a Department of Transportation that is literally has billions of dollars that is earmarked towards states that can put together strong packages for allocation for things like everything from rail across town to high-speed rail to all these other things. And so what we need, though, is a plan. What we need is a plan. And when you think about how we're going to think about transportation in our time, it's going to be through three different lenses. One, it's the lens of equity. And when I say equity, that means both who is building it and who can benefit from it. The second lens is going to be the environment, making sure we're putting together environmentally friendly options. And the third is communication with the people and our community, where nothing can nor should happen if you're not in communication and you're not working it through with local elected officials and with the people. As I say, nothing about us without us. And so you need to be able to have your process that you're incorporating community voice into this work and community feedback into this work. But those are the three lenses that we're going to look at all transportation assets. But we have a new chance, a new opportunity, billions of dollars on board for us to rethink this. And this is why voting matters, because who sits in these seats matters. Who's making these decisions matters. And so when people say, oh, it doesn't impact me. Oh, yes, it does. It impacts everything, because everything in your life is a policy decision. The air you breathe is a policy decision. The water you drink is a policy decision. The schools our children are attending is a policy decision. How you're policed is a policy decision. The homes we live in is a policy decision. The ability to create economic mobility is a policy decision. All of it is policy. So the idea that this doesn't impact you is just not true. We have to take control of our own future in this moment.
And Wes, I know you voted early. My family and I, we got out there. We voted early. If you're watching this and you're in the state of Maryland, please go out there and vote. Vote. Please do, because as you can hear, everything's a policy decision. It's gonna impact you some way. This concludes our first part of our conversation. I want to spend the remaining time here opening up the conversation for Q&A from those in our group coaching program, the Next Gen Accelerator. We've got some pre-submitted questions here. For those of you in Next Gen who are on now, if you have a question, we're going to do this in an organized manner. Please click the reactions button and raise your hand. After we get through the pre-submitted questions, I will take you off of mute, and then you can ask your question to Wes Moore. First question here. A day after the mass shooting in Illinois, Governor Hogan suspended what's known as the good and substantial reason standard for carrying concealed weapons. Hogan's directive means Maryland gun owners no longer have to offer a justification for carrying concealed firearms. So what specific regulations would you put in place for someone to purchase a gun, and what gun control laws would you put in place for assault weapons or any other firearm?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that question. It's a deeply personal question because there's no one who. And first of all, I say I'm very proud of the fact that I'm the only Baltimorean in this race. The only Baltimorean in this race. And so I always say I'm the only candidate running for governor who, when we're talking about Baltimore, I don't need a preacher. When we're going through our neighborhoods, I don't need a map.
Yep.
Like this is where my wife and we're raising our kids. You know what I'm saying? Like this is personal to me.
Love it.
And I think about this in context where we have all been so gripped with this level of gun violence that we continue to see in our communities. And one of the most heartbreaking things about it is for so many people in Baltimore, it's not even like a piercing pain anymore. It's more of a chronic pain. Like we just deal with it. And we should never be okay with the amount of violence and gun violence that we continue to see in our communities. Never be okay with it. And I think that, again, when the governor was, used his reason and his rationale when he said, well, it's the Supreme Court, there's nothing I can do about it. You know what? Not only do we know that wasn't true, because other states did. New York led on it. The governor of New York said, you know what? I understand what the Supreme Court is saying. However, we can actually use state law to be able to ensure and have your carve-outs and say, fine, if the Supreme Court says that, what we're going to do in New York is create a laundry list of exceptions. That all that is fine too, except for in public spaces, except for restaurants, except for schools, and they created a laundry list of exceptions in it as a way of being able to circumvent around the decision of the Supreme Court.
I love
right?
it.
So to say, well, the Supreme Court decides there's nothing we can do, that's just not true. You're just choosing not to. You're choosing not to. The same thing, frankly, that we see with Roe v. Wade, where I'm very, very clear. The state of Maryland will be a safe haven for abortion rights, period. And that's regardless of what some Trump judges say, because there are things that you can do on a state law and a state level to say, we are going to protect abortion rights. We're going to say abortion is health care here in the state of Maryland, and that we are going to protect women's rights to choose and having their bodily autonomy be protected here. And we will release funds in order to ensure that people and providers are also being protected and all that. We are going to do that, regardless of what the Supreme Court has said. And there are legal justifications to it. But so when we're talking about gun violence and the type of violence that we continue to see, there's a few things that we are going to prioritize. We are going to make sure that we are getting these guns off the streets, period. And we are going to go after these guns, and specifically these illegal guns that continue to flood into our communities that are coming from other states. And the flood of illegal guns that are ending up in our communities is staggering. And so we have to be able to work with our federal partners. We have to be able to work with ATF. We have to make sure that we're not just getting the guns off of the streets, but the people who are bringing the guns in, that there are consequences to it. And they need to understand that and know that. And they're going to feel the full weight of the state if they choose to go about that behavior. We also have to make sure we're doing things like getting the ghost guns off of our streets, where I think our legislature did heroic work in the last legislative session when they were able to pass a law banning ghost guns. And for those who let me explain for someone, a ghost gun is basically a gun. It's untraceable, unmarked. It's basically, you can make them with a 3D printer. But these are guns that are being created and are taking lives, right? And they use them in their print because, again, they're untraced. And so we ban them in the state of Maryland. But unless you have executive level leadership to be able to fund what it means to ban them, what it means to get them off the streets, what it means to ensure they cannot be produced, then you essentially are passing an unfunded mandate and not something that is going to be able to be reinforced. And so, respectfully to the governor, his decision is not following the law. Because if you care about dealing with these issues, if you care about addressing them, you would do what other governors have done and say, we will respect what the Supreme Court says because the Supreme Court, I get it. However, in our state, we're going to take a different type of approach.
That's right.
And that's a different type of leadership that I know I would take.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Thank you for referencing New York and the way they handled it. That's news to me. I'm glad to hear that those innovative approaches are happening and that you're aligned with it. That's fantastic. Next question here. When it comes to mental health, so mental health is at a critical state across the country. Black and brown communities suffer and go untreated at higher rates than others. One of the main reasons is due to affordability. What programs would you create that could provide Marylanders access to good mental health care?
Mental health is truly one of the, it's not just one of the great crises that we continue to see within our society. It's also one of the things that we are seeing in every way, shape, and form. Right? We're seeing it in our education system. We are seeing it in our employment systems. We are seeing it in our criminal justice system, where frankly, the largest mental health provider that we have in the state of Maryland is the criminal justice system. That's the largest mental health provider in the state of Maryland, is the criminal justice system. Because oftentimes that's how we have dealt with mental health. That's how we have dealt with substance abuse, where I think about even things like, addictions, where, part of the challenge we've had when it comes to dealing with addictions is that we basically criminalize it without actually understanding that this is a mental health challenge and a physical challenge that people are actually having in dealing with the issue of addiction. And so mental health is something that we are going to have to treat with a measure of urgency, and we're going to have to invest in. And that means, for example, in our education system, that we have to make sure that we are providing incentives and we're investing in mental health supports for both students, but also for our educators. Because we can't pretend like our educators haven't been going through an incredibly traumatic experience over these past few years. So we need to ensure that we actually have mental health supports that are going to support both students and educators. It means that we have to be able to have mental health supports for both people and both knowing that, for example, 41% of all 911 calls have some form of mental health breakthrough, right? And so we need to be very serious and very sincere about the every single 911 call. Doesn't make sense. Again, follow the data. And so we should do what innovative places are doing, like what Anne Arundel County is doing, which is making historic and career investments in things like CIT, these crisis intervention teams, because that actually helps to determine who responds to emergencies when they're called in. And oftentimes, it should not be a police officer who's responding, because by nature, you're escalating a situation when you're introducing police officers into a conversation. But it also does mean that we need to provide better mental health supports to our law enforcement officers as well, because we cannot pretend like the things that they are seeing and enduring every single day are not traumatic in their own nature as well. And frankly, the same way that the military matured, and when I served in Afghanistan, it was basically you had to opt in for mental health supports and mental health treatments. The military got away from that model because they realized that everybody who was deployed was having traumatic experiences. And so that doesn't mean they're all coming back damaged, but it means you are coming back different. Well, we have to acknowledge that law enforcement is going through the same type of challenge and paradigm, particularly for law enforcement that are involved in heavily engaged areas like in Baltimore. So our ability to be able to support mental health supports for them as well becomes important. Our ability to add trauma-informed care in every aspect of our society and community becomes imperative in order for us to grow and in order for us to heal. So these are all things that you see that mental health takes a very important role in terms of the way we're going to invest, with the expectations we're going to have, and the lens in which we think about our government's philosophy.
Wes, I believe you said that 40% of all 911 calls are related to some type of mental health capacity in that space. That's a lot, and I can imagine that police officers, paramedics, EMTs, they're bogged down with calls that could be redirected to others for better care, for less expensive care, and to free up things like hospital beds and clinics. That's something that makes a lot of sense. I know in West Baltimore, there's an opportunity, and they're looking at different innovative ways to ensure that there are facilities in place to help take on those types of calls. So that's great.
That's exactly right. And we have to, and this moment gives us an opportunity to be able to rethink all of these things, right? Because we know we need policing that moves with appropriate intensity and absolute integrity, right? We know that. But we also don't know that part of the equation means, what are we asking them to do? What is the job you're asking them to perform? And there needs to be a real level of maturity and thoughtfulness about that, because if not, we are just going to just repeatedly find ourselves in these same situations because we're not learning lessons that we should be learning.
Yeah, exactly right. I see one question here. Leslie Redmond, I'm going to unmute you here so you can ask your question, our first question from the audience.
Thank you so much. Great piece, Mr. Moore. It's nice to see you again. I saw you at an event not too long ago. My question to you is...
Hey, Leslie, I'm sorry, I lost you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? I'm going to turn off my Wi-Fi. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Leslie. Wes, you can't hear?
I can. Sorry.
Okay, Leslie, tell me the question. I will share it with Wes.
So remember he mentioned earlier about the premier HBCUs that we have available and being able to attract teachers. How does he plan on making Maryland more competitive, not just to attract teachers, but to attract residents overall and potentially even corporations that can bring more jobs and opportunities?
Excellent question. So Wes, the question from Leslie is, earlier you spoke about premier HBCUs and attracting more teachers. How do you plan to make Maryland more competitive, not only to attract more teachers, but also to attract more residents as well as businesses?
I love that question, Leslie. Thank you. Thank you. You know, because, and here's the thing, right? I want our state to be, I mean, I swear, this is going to be Maryland's decade. This is going to be the time, this is going to be the decade when entrepreneurs want to come here and grow, where innovation wants to come here and live. Because think about it. Think about all the assets that we have here in the state of Maryland, right? Where we have literally, this is the home of over 50 military installations here in the state of Maryland. This is the home of everything from the NIH to the CDC to APL to every acronym known to man, I think, here exists here in the state of Maryland. Like, this is our time. And so actually, it's a very easy sell. But what we have to do is we have to be intentional about what it is that we're selling, and also make sure we're hearing these CEOs and leaders and entrepreneurs when they're talking about the things that they're looking for when it comes to places they want to come to. And you know, the things that I keep on hearing from business leaders is they're asking a few basic questions that we've got to have better answers to. And that's things like, tell me about your schools. Because if I'm bringing my businesses to your area and I'm bringing employees, I need to know about the schools they're attending. Tell me about public safety. Am I bringing my business to a place where people can feel safe? Because the truth is, if people do not feel safe, they will not come. And if people do not feel safe, they will not stay. Tell me about your public transportation assets. We all saw what happened with FIFA and soccer, where one of the reasons listed as to why they did not pick the Baltimore region was because of mass transit. Because people did not have mass transit options to be able to move around once you bring a major event like the World Cup to Baltimore. So we've got to be deliberate and intentional about building to our success, about being able to leverage our assets, about being able to, yes, make this a place that we are going to grow organically, and reduce the regulatory red tape and permitting processes for our small businesses to be able to grow and thrive. Make sure we're fixing procurement laws, so we're giving our MBEs, our minority-owned businesses, and our WEs, our women business enterprises, a real chance to grow and succeed. Because right now we have a broken procurement system. We have a goal of 29% for MBE, for minority business enterprise participation, that we've come nowhere near hitting as a state. So if you have a goal of 29%, you come nowhere near hitting, that's not a goal. That's a suggestion, right? We need to make this a real goal and put real benchmarks around it, put real enforcement behind these type of things. But it's both about how are we helping our businesses to grow organically and our entrepreneurs to grow here. But also, it is about our ability to take this state on an 8-year roadshow. We are going to sell this state. And I'm very clear, and I say it where I'm like, listen, I'll tell these other governors, I want y'all to like me, I guess. But here's what I need y'all to know. Every time I go to one of your states, I'm bringing 3 businesses with me. Unapologetic. This is going to be Maryland's decade. We are going to build, we are going to grow, we are going to thrive, we are going to excel, we are going to compete, we are going to win. But it means we have to be intentional. And it means the politics and the small ball that we've been playing, there is no room for it in this moment. There's no space for it in this time. There's no space for where we feel like we have to beg to get a seat. There's no space for a time when we somehow think that it's okay to be the tail and not be the head. This is a time when we got a unique opportunity to go hard, to go in, to truly be bold, and to say that there is never a room that we don't belong in. I am never in any room because of someone's benevolence or because of someone's kindness. I'm never in a room because of someone's social experiment. I'm in every room that I'm in because I belong there, and that room will be incomplete without me. And that's the mentality and the mindset that we need all of our children to own. That they are there because they belong. And they are there because our society and our economics would not be complete if they were not there. That's why they are there. And so this is our time for us to really go hard. This is our time to do this. And I'll say this, and I'll say this too, where, I know that people remind me of the fact that, like, listen, our state has never elected an African American statewide, despite the fact that, we're over 40% of the population. And people say, in fact, this country has only elected 2 governors in its history. Deval Patrick in Massachusetts, Doug Walter in Virginia. That's it. That's all this country has ever elected. But I'm very, very clear. We are in this process. We are in this journey. And we are in this journey together because we come from roots of survivors. And we come from roots of excellence. And we will put everything on the fact that the shoulders that we are standing on are broad and strong. That's why we can see as far as we see. And so in this time and in this chance, we are just simply, we're not asking to do something because we're trying to make history. We're doing something because the bricks have already been laid. We're just simply being asked to walk in this moment.
Woo, deliberate and intentional. I don't know about y'all, but I'm ready to run through this brick wall behind me. I thought I was going to get some sleep tonight. Let's go. Wes, we got one more question from the audience. I know we're a little bit past 9 o'clock. I hope it's okay if I let Phaedra Stewart ask her question.
This is all right.
Fantastic. Phaedra, I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you so much. Good evening. Thank you for spending this time with us. Really, really appreciate it. Just very quickly back to the topic of mental health. At one point in time in Maryland, we had multiple state-run mental health facilities. And it appears, I haven't seen numbers, but once we started to privatize those services, things just kind of got out of control. What are your thoughts on re-implementing state-run facilities for mental health services?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch everything on that. I'm sorry.
Khalil, could you hear me, or should I repeat it?
Can you repeat it one time, and I'll say it again?
Okay, not a problem. At one point in time in the state of Maryland, we had multiple state-run mental health facilities. When we started to privatize those services, that's when it appeared as though things were kind of getting out of control, and people with mental health issues were not getting the services that were needed, and they were just basically placed out on the street. What are your thoughts on reinstituting state-run mental health facilities to help with the situation?
Got it. So, Wes, the question is, at one point in time, there were multiple state-run mental health facilities. Once they became privatized, it seemed like the quality and the exposure, the availability for folks, it went down. Correct. Exactly. What's your thought on creating state-run mental health facilities?
Yeah, great question. Great question. Thank you. And here's how I think we need to think about that process, both when it comes to state mental health facilities, but also just how we're talking about the idea of partnerships with the private sector in the first place, is that there needs to be matched interests. And part of the challenge that we have when it comes to the partnerships that we have, public-private partnerships, is if you have interests that are not matched, that's when you end up with these unintended consequences that are going to have a significant impact, particularly on the community that are supposed to be supported and benefiting from it. And so I think that the state needs to take a greater level of control, particularly when it comes to to mental health facilities. I think we need to have a greater level of accountability when it comes to it, but also the accountability is not just for how we have state facilities that are government run, but also just because something is a public-private partnership does not mean the accountability measures then go out of the window. There still needs to be accountability. And that's where I think you've had, again, a swing in another direction that has become problematic. And so I think the state needs to take a greater level of not just accountability, but control. But also, even when you have places of public-private partnerships, which again, I am not against public-private partnerships. What I'm against is predatory relationships that then begin to exist when you have a privatization of entities that are supposed to support a common good. And that's the thing that I think that the state needs to play a greater level of control on.
Excellent. Thank you, Wes. Thank you, Phaedra, Leslie, and thank you others for the questions that you have pre-submitted. I see somebody in the chat saying that we need Wes in New York City. I saw somebody else in the chat earlier saying, you have my vote, Wes. Thank you, brother. 06. I think that's Fred. Yep, there we go.
Yeah. Fine.
Thank you so much for your time, Wes. For those of you who have not gone out to vote, tomorrow is the last day for early voting. Please go out and vote. If you're unable to make it tomorrow, July 19th is the gubernatorial primary election day. So be sure to go out and vote because your vote matters. And it absolutely will make a difference for the future of the state of Maryland. Our time is now, and we're excited to have you here with us live, Wes. Thank you so much for joining.
It's my joy. Listen, for everybody, the thing that I asked, this has been a joy, and I apologize a bit about my voice. We've been leaving it all in the streets. We got 5 days. I'm leaving it all in the streets. We're leaving nothing to chance. But the thing that I ask you, everybody, is this, sincerely, is take this election personally. Take this moment personally. Do not let this moment go by and feel like your voice was not heard. Do not let this moment go by when we got so much on the line and so much at stake and to feel like you were not part of a process. Take this election personally. And so I ask, not only do I very humbly ask you for your vote and I ask you for your support, but I ask you to go out and go bring your family too. And if you got your whole family, go get your block. And if you got your whole block, go get your neighborhood. Bring them all. Because if we do that, this is our moment and we will win. We will win. We're right now literally the front runner in this race. It is crazy to think about it, y'all. When we started 14 months ago, when literally at 1%, and no one thought this thing could be real at all, we are now the front runner. And it's because we've outworked everybody. It's because we've done everything that we've only known in our culture and history is just work harder than everybody, right? We've done that. And we are right now at the goal line. But we need your help to push across that finish line. Take it personal. Bring everybody out. If we do that, we're going to get to work in January. And I could not be more excited. So God bless y'all. Thank you.
And thank you, Wes. Thank you so much. This concludes our event for the evening.
Thank you,
I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And thank you, Kiara. Thank you, too. Bless both y'all.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Y'all are beautiful. Bless y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.